My best friend falsely accused me of something unforgivable, and even my family turned against me. But after the truth came out, they asked for forgiveness. And I did the unimaginable. The pounding started at 5:47 a.m. Not the gentle knock of a neighbor or the familiar sound of the mailman. This was the aggressive, commanding bang that could only mean one thing: trouble. I jolted awake, my heart already racing before my mind could process what was happening. The pounding continued, growing more violent with each passing second. Through my bedroom window, I could see the flashing red and blue lights painting the walls of my childhood room in alternating colors of dread. "Police! Open up!" The voice was gruff, authoritative, and absolutely terrifying in the pre-dawn darkness. My parents' voices erupted from downstairs. Confusion, panic, the sound of my mother crying. I stumbled out of bed, still in my pajamas, my mind spinning with possibilities. What could they possibly want with us? We were nobody special, just a regular middle-class family trying to get by. The front door crashed open before anyone could reach it. Heavy boots thundered across our hardwood floors, and suddenly 4 officers were in my room, their faces stern and unforgiving in the harsh beam of their flashlights. "Get your hands where we can see them," one barked, and I instinctively raised my arms, my whole body trembling. This couldn't be real. This had to be some horrible mistake. "You're under arrest for theft of property valued over $10,000, another officer stated as cold metal handcuffs clicked around my wrists. The sound was final, terrifying, the sound of my life changing forever. My mother's screams echoed from the hallway as they dragged me past her. Her face was pale with shock, her hands reaching out toward me as if she could somehow pull me back from this nightmare. My father stood frozen, his mouth agape, unable to comprehend what was happening to his son. The walk to the police car felt like a death march. Our entire neighborhood had awakened to the commotion. Porch lights flickering on, curtains twitching, faces pressed against windows. The elderly woman from next door stood on her lawn in her bathrobe, her hand covering her mouth in shock. The family across the street watched from their driveway, their teenage son filming everything on his phone. I had never felt such crushing humiliation. These were people who had watched me grow up, who had seen me mow their lawns and shovel their driveways. Now they were watching me get arrested like some common criminal, and I didn't even know why. The officer's hand pressed firmly on the top of my head as they guided me into the back of the police car. Through the window, I could see my parents standing in our doorway, holding each other and crying. The sight of their broken faces was almost worse than the handcuffs cutting into my wrists. As we drove away, I caught glimpses of my neighbors still standing outside, some taking pictures, others whispering among themselves. The damage was already done. Whatever this was about, whatever mistake had been made, my reputation in this community was destroyed. The worst part was the complete bewilderment. I had gone to bed last night after a perfectly normal evening. Dinner with my family, some television, a phone call with my girlfriend. Nothing in my life had prepared me for this moment, this sudden, violent intrusion that turned my world upside down. In the back of that police car, watching my childhood neighborhood disappear behind me, I had no idea that this was just the beginning. The fluorescent lights in the interrogation room buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows across the metal table where I sat, still handcuffed and utterly bewildered. The detective sat across from me, a thick manila folder spread open between us, his expression as cold as the concrete walls surrounding us. "Let's start from the beginning," he said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute certainty. "3 nights ago, you were at the residence of a certain young woman, correct?" My stomach dropped. I knew immediately who he meant. We'd been friends since high school, part of the same social circle. Her family was, well, everyone knew about her family. Her father was one of the most respected judges in the county. Her mother owned a chain of high-end boutiques that catered to the city's elite. They lived in the kind of house that had a circular driveway and a 3-car garage. "Yes," I answered carefully. "We watched movies with a few other friends. Nothing unusual." The detective's eyes narrowed. Nothing unusual about stealing a Rolex Submariner worth $28,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. $28,000. That was more than my father made in 6 months at the factory. I stared at the detective, my mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "I didn't steal anything," I managed to whisper. "I don't understand what's happening here." "The victim's family reported the watch missing the morning after your visit," he continued, his tone suggesting he'd already convicted me in his mind. It was a gift from the judge to his wife for their 20th anniversary. Priceless sentimental value on top of its monetary worth. My hands were shaking now. The mother's Rolex. I vaguely remembered seeing her wear expensive jewelry, but I'd never paid close attention. I certainly hadn't stolen anything. Detective, I swear to you, I had no idea about any watch. We sat in the living room the entire time, ordered pizza, watched Netflix. That's it. You can ask any of the other people who were there. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with the calculating gaze of someone who'd heard every lie imaginable. We already did. Funny thing is, they all confirm you were there, but they also mention you used the bathroom upstairs, multiple times. The statement hung in the air like an accusation. Yes, I had used the upstairs bathroom. The downstairs one was occupied when I needed it. But the implication was clear and devastating. Using the bathroom isn't a crime, I said, my voice cracking with desperation. No, but it gave you access to the master bedroom where the watch was kept in the wife's jewelry box. He flipped through several photographs in his folder, each one showing different angles of an ornate bedroom with expensive furniture and a large jewelry case on the dresser. I felt the walls closing in around me. This wasn't just about a missing watch. This was about my word against one of the most powerful families in the city. The judge's reputation was impeccable. His wife was a pillar of the business community. And me? I was nobody. Just a 22-year-old college student who lived with his parents and worked part-time at a sporting goods store. I want a lawyer, I said quietly. The detective's smile was predatory. Smart choice, kid. You're going to need one. This family isn't taking this lightly. They've got connections that go all the way to the state level. This isn't some petty theft case that gets pleaded down to community service. As he left me alone in that cold room, the full weight of my situation began to settle in. I wasn't just fighting a false accusation. I was fighting a system that was already stacked against me. The house felt different when I walked through the front door. It wasn't just the absence of my laptop, phone, and tablet, all confiscated by the police as potential evidence of online sales. It was the way my parents looked at me, their faces etched with a fear I'd never seen before. My mother's eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying. She rushed to embrace me, but her hug felt desperate, clinging, as if she was afraid they might come back and take me away again. My father stood by the window, periodically peeking through the blinds at the street outside. They took everything, my mother whispered against my shoulder. Your computer, your phone, even that old tablet you never use. They had a warrant. We couldn't stop them. The violation felt complete. Not only had they destroyed my reputation in front of the entire neighborhood, but they'd ransacked my personal space, rifling through years of private memories and conversations. Every photo, every message, every browser search would be scrutinized by strangers looking for evidence of a crime I didn't commit. Dad, what did the neighbors say? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He turned from the window, his face grave. Mrs. Peterson asked if we needed anything. She seemed sympathetic, but the family next door, he shook his head. They pulled their kids inside when they saw you coming up the driveway. The sting of judgment from people I'd known my entire life was almost unbearable. These were the same children I'd played with as a kid, the same families who'd attended my high school graduation party. Now I was the dangerous criminal they needed to protect their children from. My sister called around noon, her voice tight with anxiety. I saw it on the local news website, she said without preamble. They didn't use your name, but they mentioned the judge's family and a $28,000 watch. Everyone's going to know it's you. The family name carried that much weight in our city. When something happened to the judge's family, it made news. When they were victims of a crime, the entire community paid attention. I didn't do it, I told her, the words feeling hollow and inadequate. I know you didn't, she replied quickly. But that's not what matters. Is it? What matters is what everyone else thinks and what that family can do to us. That evening, my parents and I sat around the dinner table in near silence. The food was barely touched. None of us had much appetite. Finally, my father cleared his throat and spoke the words that had been hanging in the air all day. Maybe we should consider moving, he said quietly. Your mother's brother in Phoenix has been asking us to visit. Maybe this would be a good time for a longer stay. The suggestion hit me like a slap. They wanted to run, to abandon the life they'd built here because their son had been accused of a crime he didn't commit. But as I looked at their faces, I understood. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about our entire family's survival in a community where that family's name held more power than the truth. "We can't run," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. That would just make me look guilty. My mother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Honey, sometimes looking guilty is better than being destroyed. The judge has friends everywhere. In the police department, the district attorney's office, the courthouse. Even if you prove your innocence, what if they don't care?" The weight of her words settled over me like a heavy blanket. She was talking about corruption, about a system where justice could be bought and sold like any other commodity. I'd grown up believing in fairness, in the idea that truth would ultimately prevail. But sitting in that dining room, watching my parents plan our escape from the only home I'd ever known, those beliefs felt naive and childish. My sister brought me her old laptop 3 days after my arrest, her face pale with concern. "You need to see what's happening online," she said, setting it down on my desk with the careful movements of someone handling a live bomb. The screen came to life, and immediately I understood her expression. My name was everywhere. It started on Facebook with a post from the businesswoman that had been shared over 300 times. Heartbroken that someone we trusted in our home would violate that trust so completely. "Please keep our family in your thoughts as we deal with this devastating theft of a precious family heirloom." The comment section was a feeding frenzy. People I'd never met were calling me every name imaginable. Friends of friends, business associates of the boutique owner, members of their country club, all united in their condemnation of the Rolex thief. The story had grown in the telling, too. Some comments claimed the watch was worth $40,000. Others suggested I was part of a larger crime ring targeting wealthy families. But it was the responses from people I actually knew that cut the deepest. "I always thought something was off about him," wrote a girl from my high school chemistry class. "He was always looking at other people's stuff with this weird expression. My mom works with his mom and says they're thinking of moving because they're so embarrassed," posted someone I'd considered a good friend. Honestly, good riddance. Even worse were the people who didn't comment at all, friends who had simply vanished from my social media entirely. My best friend since middle school had unfriended me without a word. A girl from college who I'd taken to prom had blocked me completely. It was as if I had become radioactive, and anyone with sense was maintaining a safe distance. The local community Facebook group had picked up the story too. "Beware! Thief targeting expensive homes," read one post that included a photo of our house with the address clearly visible. The comments ranged from people offering security advice to others sharing their own experiences with suspicious characters in the neighborhood. The businesswoman's connections had turned this from a simple criminal case into a social media campaign. Her boutiques catered to the city's elite, and every wealthy woman in town seemed to have an opinion about what had happened to her priceless family heirloom. They shared the story on Instagram, Twitter, even LinkedIn, each platform adding its own layer of judgment and speculation. I discovered that the daughter herself had posted a carefully crafted message that made my blood run cold. "Sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you most. I'm learning to trust my instincts and protect my family from those who would take advantage of our kindness." The post had hundreds of likes and dozens of supportive comments. "Stay strong, beautiful. You're handling this with such grace. Don't let them victim blame you." Victim blame? I was the one being blamed for something I didn't do, but somehow she had positioned herself as the victim in this narrative. The manipulation was so smooth, so expertly crafted, that even reading it made me question my own memory of events. The truly frightening part was the speed of it all. In just 3 days, the story had spread far beyond our immediate social circle. Hashtags like "Shuncher, Justice for the Victim," and "Such a Rolex Thief" were trending locally. Someone had created a Twitter account dedicated to exposing me, posting old photos from high school with captions analyzing my shifty expressions and criminal behavior. A local blogger who covered society events had written a piece titled "The Betrayal of Trust," how one family's generosity was rewarded with theft. She painted a picture of the judge's family as pillars of the community who had opened their hearts and home to a young man from a less fortunate background, only to be repaid with devastating betrayal. As I scrolled through post after post, comment after comment, I realized I wasn't just fighting a false accusation anymore. I was fighting a sophisticated character assassination campaign backed by unlimited resources and social connections that reached into every corner of our community. The first business to refuse me was the family-owned market where my mother had shopped for 15 years. I walked in Tuesday morning, needing milk for my coffee, and immediately felt the shift in atmosphere. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, and every eye in the store turned toward me. The owner himself approached, his weathered face apologetic but firm. "I'm sorry, son, but I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Sir, I've been coming here since I was a kid. My mom shops here all the time." He glanced nervously toward the other customers, lowering his voice. "I know, and I'm not saying I believe what people are saying, but the judge's wife is one of my biggest wholesale customers. Her boutiques buy all their gift baskets from me for the holidays. I can't afford to upset her." The calculation was simple and brutal. My family's weekly grocery bill versus their commercial account. We lost. Word traveled fast. By Thursday, 3 more businesses had made it clear I wasn't welcome. The coffee shop near campus stopped taking my orders. The gas station attendant suddenly needed to check with the manager every time I tried to pay for fuel. Even the public library had the security guard follow me around like I was planning to steal books. But it was the confrontation at the mall that showed me just how deep this went. I was walking toward the food court when I spotted the businesswoman herself, impeccably dressed in a designer suit, carrying shopping bags from stores I couldn't afford to window shop in. She saw me at the same moment, and her face immediately hardened into a mask of righteous indignation. "You have some nerve showing your face in public," she said loudly, her voice king across the mall. Other shoppers began to slow down, sensing drama. "Ma'am, I didn't steal your watch. There's been a mistake." "Don't you dare lie to me," she interrupted, stepping closer. "I know exactly what kind of person you are. Poor boy from a poor family, jealous of what we've worked hard to achieve. You saw an opportunity and you took it." A crowd was gathering now, phones appearing to record the confrontation. I felt trapped, cornered by not just her, but by the growing circle of onlookers who clearly knew who she was and assumed I was guilty. "My daughter trusted you," she continued, her voice rising with each word. "She welcomed you into our home, treated you like family, and you repaid that kindness by stealing from us. That watch belonged to my grandmother. It's irreplaceable." That was the first I'd heard about the watch being an heirloom, and I wondered how many other details about the case were evolving to make the story more compelling, more heartbreaking. "I understand you're upset," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the dozens of people recording our every word. "But I didn't take anything. I'm as confused about this as you are." Her laugh was cold and theatrical. "Confused? The only thing I'm confused about is how we didn't see through you sooner. But don't worry. My husband's friends in the district attorney's office are making sure justice is served. And my friends in the business community are making sure everyone knows what kind of person they're dealing with." The threat was clear and delivered with the confidence of someone who had never been told no in her life. She wasn't just talking about the criminal case. She was talking about a systematic campaign to destroy my reputation and my family's livelihood in this city. As she walked away, several people in the crowd applauded, as if they had just witnessed some kind of heroic confrontation rather than a powerful woman publicly humiliating someone who couldn't fight back. That night, my parents sat me down for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. "We need to talk about Phoenix," my father said quietly. "Your uncle called again. He's found me a job at the plant there. Better pay, fresh start." My mother's hands were shaking as she spoke. "Honey, we can't keep living like this. Your father got pulled aside at work today." His supervisor said some of the other employees were uncomfortable working with the father of a thief. As I sat there listening to my parents plan our exile, I understood that I wasn't fighting a legal case or even a false accusation. I was fighting a system where wealth and influence could rewrite reality itself. The call came at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday, exactly 2 weeks after my arrest. I was lying in bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to my parents' whispered conversations through the thin walls, when my sister's phone rang downstairs. A few minutes later, she knocked on my door. "There's someone on the phone for you," she said, her voice strange and cautious. "Says she's the best friend of her." I knew immediately who she meant. She'd been at the house that night, sitting curled up in the corner of the couch, mostly quiet except for occasional giggles at the movie. She was one of those people who seemed to exist in the accuser's shadow, always agreeing, always supportive, never quite developing her own voice in conversations. When I took the phone, her voice was barely above a whisper, shaky with what sounded like tears. "I can't do this anymore," she said without preamble. "I can't watch what's happening to you and your family." My heart started racing. "What are you talking about?" "She planned it," she blurted out, the words tumbling over each other in her rush to get them out. She planned the whole thing. She stole her mom's watch herself and hid it. She made up the story about you taking it because you rejected her. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. What? 3 weeks before that night, she asked me what I thought about you two dating. I told her you seemed like friends, nothing more. She got this look in her eyes, this angry look, and she said you'd made it clear you weren't interested when she'd hinted around about it. I remembered that conversation. She had suggested we hang out alone sometime, maybe catch a movie, just the two of us. I'd deflected, mentioning how much I enjoyed our group hangouts instead. It had been awkward, but I'd tried to be gentle about it. Are you saying she did all this because I didn't want to date her? Her voice cracked. She said rich girls don't get told no by poor boys. She said you needed to learn your place, and her family had the power to teach you. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. This wasn't a crime of passion or a moment of poor judgment. This was calculated revenge, planned and executed with the cold precision of someone who had never faced consequences for their actions. I have proof, she continued, her voice getting stronger now that the initial confession was out. Screenshots of our text conversations. She told me exactly how she was going to do it, step by step. She even laughed about how easy it would be to convince everyone you were guilty. My hands were trembling as I held the phone. Why didn't you say something sooner? The silence stretched so long I thought she might have hung up. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with shame. Because I was scared. And because part of me thought you deserved it. She made it sound like you had humiliated her, rejected her in front of everyone. She said you needed to be taken down a peg. But then I saw what happened at the mall. My mom filmed it, thought it was hilarious watching her mother destroy you in public. When I saw your face, saw how broken you looked, I realized this had gone way beyond teaching you a lesson. They're trying to destroy your entire life over hurt feelings. She paused, and I could hear her crying softly. I've been her best friend since we were 8 years old. I've covered for her, lied for her, helped her out of trouble more times than I can count. But this, I can't be part of this anymore. What kind of proof do you have? Everything, she said with sudden determination. Text messages where she admits she stole the watch. Voice recordings where she talks about framing you. Photos of her hiding the watch in her closet. She documented everything because she was so proud of her plan. Meet me tomorrow night, Riverside Park, by the old bandstand. Bring a flash drive or something. I'll give you copies of everything. But you have to promise me something. What? Promise me you'll be careful. She isn't just some spoiled rich girl throwing a tantrum. She's dangerous, and her family has resources we can't even imagine. Riverside Park at 10 p.m. was a different world from the cheerful daytime playground I remembered from childhood. The old bandstand sat in a pool of dim streetlight, surrounded by shadows that seemed to move with every breeze. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heart hammering against my ribs as I scanned the darkness for any sign of the best friend. Or worse, anyone who might have followed her. She emerged from behind a cluster of oak trees like a ghost, clutching a large manila envelope against her chest. Even in the poor light, I could see that she'd been crying. Her usual put-together appearance was gone, replaced by the haggard look of someone who hadn't slept in days. I almost didn't come, she whispered as she approached. She called me 3 times today, wanting to hang out, talk about colleges, normal friend stuff, acting like everything was perfectly fine while your family is planning to flee the state. I took the envelope with hands that shook slightly. It was heavier than I'd expected, thick with documents and what felt like several USB drives. Before I look at this, I need you to understand what you're doing. Once we use this evidence, there's no going back. She and her family will know it came from you. She laughed bitterly. You think I don't know that? You think I haven't been imagining what the judge can do to my family? My dad's a plumber. My mom works at the DMV. We're nobody special, just like you. But that's exactly why I have to do this. I opened the envelope under the streetlight and immediately understood why she looked so terrified. The first document was a printed screenshot of a text conversation between the 2 friends, dated 5 days before the movie night. Her. I'm going to teach that arrogant asshole a lesson he'll never forget. Best friend. What are you talking about? Her. Poor boy thinks he can reject me, like he's got options? I'm going to show him what happens when you disrespect someone with real power. The conversation continued for dozens of screenshots, laying out the plan in nauseating detail. She described stealing her mother's watch, hiding it in her closet, then calling the police after I left. She even joked about which of my nervous habits would make me look guilty on camera. She was so proud of herself, the best friend said quietly, watching me read. She kept texting me updates like it was some kind of game. The next section contained voice recordings, dozens of them. She had apparently been recording their phone conversations for weeks, though I suspected she'd originally been doing it for different reasons. Listen to track 7, she said, handing me earbuds connected to an old iPod. That's from 2 days after your arrest. The accuser's voice came through the tiny speakers, bright with excitement. Did you see the news coverage? They're calling it a shocking betrayal of trust. Mom's milking it for everything it's worth. She's got half the city ready to run you out of town, and Dad's friends at the courthouse are talking about making an example of you. The best friend's recorded voice responded, Don't you think this is getting a little out of hand? Out of hand? She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. This is just getting started. By the time we're done with him, no one in this city will ever disrespect our family again. Mom's already talking to the district attorney about pushing for the maximum sentence, 3 to 5 years for grand theft. My blood turned to ice. 3 to 5 years in prison for a crime I didn't commit, all because I hadn't wanted to date a spoiled psychopath. The photos were the final piece of evidence, and the most damning. The best friend had somehow managed to photograph the accuser's closet, showing the Rolex hidden inside a shoebox behind winter coats. The timestamp on the photos showed they were taken just yesterday. She still has it, she explained. She's been wearing it around the house, taking selfies with it, posting them to her private Instagram stories.
She thinks it's hilarious that everyone's looking for something that's literally sitting in her bedroom. I stared at the photos, my mind racing. This wasn't just evidence of my innocence. It was proof of her guilt, her premeditation, and her complete lack of remorse.
But more than that, it was documentation of how a wealthy family could weaponize the justice system against someone they considered beneath them. There's more, she said, pulling out another USB drive. She's been bragging to her college friends about the whole thing. She recorded videos explaining how easy it is to manipulate poor people when you have money and connections. She's been treating your life like entertainment. The cruelty was breathtaking. She hadn't just falsely accused me, she'd turned my suffering into content for her social media presence. A cautionary tale about what happened to people who didn't know their place. Why are you doing this? Really? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the dark water of the river beyond the park. Because I realized that if she could do this to you for something as simple as not wanting to date her, she could do it to anyone, including me, if I ever stopped being useful to her. She turned to face me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I've been her best friend for 10 years, and I just realized I don't actually know her at all. The person who planned this, who's enjoying your suffering, that's not someone I can call a friend anymore. Will you testify? Officially, I mean. In court? She nodded slowly. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. But you need to move fast. She's been talking about disposing of evidence soon. I think she's planning to get rid of the watch now that the heat's died down. As we prepared to leave, she grabbed my arm. One more thing. Be careful who you trust with this information. The judge has friends everywhere, and she's been bragging about having inside sources keeping them informed about your case. There might be people in the system working for them. Walking back to my car with the envelope clutched against my chest, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks. The possibility of justice. The attorney's office was everything the judge's family's power wasn't, earned rather than inherited. Law books lined every wall, framed certificates from her years as a prosecutor hung between photos of her with governors and Supreme Court justices, and her desk was organized with the precision of someone who'd never lost a case she believed in. I've been following your case, she said without preamble, as I sat down across from her mahogany desk. The judge called me personally 2 days after your arrest, asking if I was planning to represent you. When I told him I hadn't been contacted, he suggested I might want to focus on other cases. More suitable cases, he said. She leaned back in her leather chair, her eyes sharp with the kind of intelligent anger that came from 30 years of fighting corruption. That phone call told me everything I needed to know about your innocence. Guilty people don't require judges to warn lawyers away from their cases. When I opened the best friend's envelope and spread the contents across her desk, the attorney's expression shifted from professional interest to barely contained rage. She examined each screenshot. listened to key portions of the audio recordings, and studied the photographs with the methodical thoroughness of someone building a case. "Jesus Christ," she whispered, after reviewing the evidence for nearly an hour. "This isn't just false accusation. This is conspiracy, evidence tampering, abuse of process, and about 6 other felonies I can think of off the top of my head." She picked up one of the screenshots showing the detailed planning messages. This level of premeditation, combined with the family's use of their influence to pressure the investigation, we're talking about a federal civil rights violation. Your constitutional right to due process was systematically violated by people acting under color of state authority. The legal terminology flew over my head, but her tone made the significance clear. This wasn't just about clearing my name anymore. It was about exposing a system of corruption that reached into the highest levels of local government. "What's our next move?" I asked. "We file everything simultaneously," she replied, already reaching for her phone. "Criminal complaint against her for theft and false reporting, civil rights lawsuit against the family for conspiracy, and a motion to dismiss all charges against you. But first, we need to make sure that watch is still where your friend says it is." The next 6 hours moved with the swift precision of a well-orchestrated legal strike. The attorney contacted the district attorney's office, the state police, and the FBI's Civil Rights Division. She presented the best friend's evidence to a federal judge who immediately issued search warrants for the judge's residence and the daughter's college dorm room. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, I was standing across the street from their mansion, watching a parade of police officers carry evidence boxes out of the house that had been my downfall. The same detective who'd interrogated me with such certainty of my guilt emerged from the front door carrying a clear plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag was the businesswoman's Rolex, exactly where the best friend had said it would be. The media response was immediate and devastating. Local news crews arrived within minutes of the search warrant execution, their cameras capturing the judge's humiliated expression as he was forced to stand aside while police ransacked his daughter's bedroom. "Judge's daughter arrested in false accusation scandal," read the evening news ticker. The same reporters who had painted me as a dangerous criminal just weeks before were now breathlessly reporting on the shocking reversal in what they were calling one of the most dramatic cases of prosecutorial misconduct in recent memory. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had used her family's media connections to destroy my reputation, but those same connections were now amplifying her downfall with equal enthusiasm. Scandal sold newspapers whether the story was about a poor boy's guilt or a rich girl's lies. The businesswoman's boutique empire began crumbling immediately. By evening, 3 major suppliers had terminated their contracts, citing concerns about being associated with the scandal. The country club, where she was a board member, called an emergency meeting to discuss her membership. Her social media accounts, which had been flooded with supportive messages during my persecution, were now overwhelmed with demands for apologies and accountability. But it was the judge's situation that created the biggest shockwaves. The State Judicial Ethics Committee announced a formal investigation into his conduct, specifically focusing on whether he had used his position to influence my case. Legal experts on the evening news were calling for his immediate recusal from all pending cases and suggesting that any convictions he'd overseen in recent months might need to be reviewed. The family that had seemed untouchable just 24 hours earlier was now facing complete social and professional destruction. Their power, built on reputation and connections, was evaporating as quickly as it had been weaponized against me. The daughter herself was arrested at her college dorm, the same expensive private school her parents had been bragging about on social media. Campus security footage showed her being led away in handcuffs while her roommates filmed everything on their phones. Within hours, the videos were viral on TikTok and Twitter, turning her into the face of privileged entitlement and false accusations. That evening, my attorney called with an update that felt almost surreal after weeks of despair. "The district attorney's office has formally dropped all charges against you," she said, her voice rich with satisfaction. "They're also launching a grand jury investigation into prosecutorial misconduct. The detective has been placed on administrative leave pending review of how he handled your case." "What about her?" "She's being held on $50,000 bail, charged with grand theft, filing false reports, and conspiracy. Her parents posted bail within 2 hours, but the damage is done. Every news outlet in the state is covering this story." As I hung up the phone, I realized that everything had changed in a single day. The evidence the best friend had risked everything to provide hadn't just cleared my name. It had exposed an entire system of corruption and privilege that most people only suspected existed. The morning after her arrest, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The story had exploded overnight, spreading far beyond our small city as national news outlets picked up what they were calling a case study in privilege and false accusations. The Today Show had already aired a segment featuring audio clips from the best friend's recordings. CNN was running a chyron that read, "Judge's daughter admits to framing innocent man." Even late-night comedy shows were making jokes about rich girls who couldn't handle rejection. But it was the local coverage that truly captured the magnitude of the family's downfall. Channel 7's investigative team had somehow obtained additional evidence, text messages between her and her college friends, where she'd bragged about having poor people wrapped around her finger and boasted about how easy it was to manipulate the system when your daddy wears a robe. The businesswoman's carefully constructed public image was disintegrating in real time. The local business journal published a scathing editorial about how her boutiques had weaponized wealth against an innocent family and called for a boycott of all her establishments. The mayor's office released a statement distancing themselves from the family's previous charitable contributions. Even the country club had posted a formal notice announcing the indefinite suspension of their memberships. The judge's situation was even more devastating. Legal analysts were dissecting every high-profile case he'd overseen, looking for evidence of bias or corruption. The state Supreme Court had assigned a special prosecutor to investigate whether he'd used his influence to interfere with my case. His own colleagues in the judiciary were calling for his immediate resignation. But perhaps most damaging of all was the revelation of how completely their daughter had manipulated her own parents. Channel 5 had obtained a recording of the phone call she made to her parents after my arrest, where she'd sobbed convincingly about being violated and betrayed by someone she'd trusted. The performance was Oscar-worthy in its calculated emotional manipulation. The audio revealed the businesswoman comforting her daughter. "We'll make sure he pays for this, sweetheart. No one hurts our family and gets away with it." The judge could be heard in the background promising to call friends at the prosecutor's office to ensure maximum charges were filed. Hearing those recordings, the community began to understand that the judge and businesswoman hadn't been malicious conspirators. They'd been grieving parents who thought their daughter had been wronged. Their use of power and influence had been motivated by parental love, which made her deception even more cruel and their own humiliation more complete. The family's emergency press conference was a masterclass in damage control, but it also revealed the depth of their shock at discovering who their daughter really was. The judge, looking haggard and older than his 62 years, stood before a dozen cameras and reporters. "My wife and I are devastated to learn that our daughter has committed serious crimes and manipulated our family's response to what we believed was a genuine victimization." His voice cracked slightly as he continued. "We extend our deepest apologies to the young man and his family who suffered because of our daughter's lies and our own misguided efforts to seek justice for what we thought was a crime against our family." The businesswoman, barely able to speak through her tears, added, "As parents, we trusted our daughter implicitly. That trust was betrayed in the most horrible way possible. We are cooperating fully with all investigations and will support any efforts to make amends for the harm our family has caused." But it was the judge's final statement that captured the true devastation. "I have recused myself from all pending cases and will be requesting a leave of absence while the ethics investigation proceeds. The justice system requires absolute integrity, and my family's actions have compromised that integrity, regardless of our intentions." Their daughter's response to the mounting evidence was predictably desperate. Through her attorney, she released a statement claiming that the best friend had fabricated evidence out of jealousy and that the recordings had been taken out of context. She suggested that she was the real victim of a conspiracy designed to destroy her family's reputation. But the evidence was too overwhelming, too technically verified, and too consistent across multiple platforms for anyone to take her claims seriously. Digital forensics experts had confirmed the authenticity of every screenshot, every recording, every piece of evidence the best friend had provided. Phone company records corroborated the timing of text messages. Security cameras at various locations verified her whereabouts during key moments of her planning. More damaging still, additional witnesses began coming forward. Her college roommate provided recordings of phone calls where she had laughed about my family's suffering. A high school friend shared old social media posts where she had joked about destroying people who crossed her. Even members of their own social circle began distancing themselves. sharing stories of her manipulative behavior that they'd previously overlooked or excused. The psychological portrait that emerged was of a young woman who had never been told no in her life, who viewed other people as objects to be manipulated for her entertainment, and who felt entitled to destroy anyone who didn't recognize her superiority. By the end of the week, the family had lost everything that mattered in their social world. The judge's legal career was effectively over. The businesswoman's empire was hemorrhaging customers and suppliers. Their reputation, carefully built over decades, lay in ruins. But perhaps most importantly, the entire community was beginning to understand how easily wealth and influence could corrupt justice, and how close an innocent person had come to being destroyed by a system that protected the powerful at the expense of the powerless. The phone call came at 7 a.m. on a Saturday, exactly 1 week after her arrest. My attorney's voice was crisp with business despite the early hour. "The family wants to meet," she said without preamble. "Full settlement conference. They're bringing their entire legal team, plus a public relations firm and what appears to be a crisis management consultant. They want this buried, and they're willing to pay whatever it takes." 3 hours later, I found myself in the conference room of my attorney's law firm, facing the family across a table laden with legal documents, financial statements, and what looked like several non-disclosure agreements. The contrast between their current appearance and their previous composed confidence was stark. The judge looked like he'd aged a decade in a week. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, his eyes rimmed with the red exhaustion of sleepless nights. The businesswoman sat beside him, her designer clothes unable to hide the way her hands shook as she clutched a tissue. Their lead attorney, a silver-haired man from a prestigious firm in the state capital, spoke first. "My clients want to make this right," he began, his tone suggesting he was used to buying his way out of problems. "They were deceived by their daughter and acted on information they believed to be true. While their response was perhaps excessive, their intentions were those of parents protecting their child." My attorney's response was ice cold. "Your clients used their influence to corrupt a criminal investigation, destroy an innocent person's reputation, and weaponize their social status against a family that couldn't fight back. Intentions are irrelevant when the actions constitute conspiracy and civil rights violations." The negotiation that followed was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. It wasn't just about money. It was about power, reputation, and the family's desperate attempt to salvage something from the wreckage of their lives. The judge himself finally spoke, his voice hollow with defeat. "What do you want from us?" My attorney slid a document across the table. "Full public retraction and apology. Admission that this young man was innocent and that your family's response was inappropriate. Cooperation with all ongoing investigations, and financial compensation for damages." The financial number at the bottom of the page made the businesswoman gasp audibly. $850,000, roughly equivalent to 30 Rolex Submariners, or 3 times the value of the watch that had started this nightmare. "That's," she began, then stopped, seeming to realize that no amount was too much to escape the hell their lives had become. Their attorney tried to negotiate, but my lawyer was relentless. "Your clients wanted to destroy an innocent family using their wealth and influence. Now they can use that same wealth to make amends. The alternative is federal civil rights charges, continued media coverage, and complete professional and social destruction." What struck me most during the negotiation wasn't the money being discussed. It was watching the family's complete capitulation. These were people who had never backed down from anything, who had used their power to crush anyone who opposed them. Now they were begging for mercy from the family they'd tried to destroy. The judge made one final attempt to maintain some dignity. "If we agree to these terms, can you guarantee the media attention will die down?" My attorney's smile was predatory. "Judge, you spent decades learning that justice can't be bought and sold. Today, you're learning that lesson from the other side." The final agreement was comprehensive and humiliating for the family. They would publicly admit that I was innocent, and that their accusations were false. They would acknowledge that their use of influence to pressure the investigation was inappropriate. They would pay the full financial settlement within 30 days. And they would cooperate with all ongoing investigations, including potential federal charges. Most importantly, their daughter would publicly apologize, admit to her crimes, and accept whatever sentence the court deemed appropriate. No more attempts to discredit the best friend. No more claims of conspiracy against their family. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue additional civil litigation and to refrain from speaking to the media about the settlement details. It was a pragmatic compromise. I would get justice and financial security, while they would get the chance to quietly disappear from public scrutiny. The judge signed the documents with the slow movements of a man burying his career. The businesswoman's signature was barely legible through her tears. Their attorneys looked relieved to finally have a resolution, no matter how expensive. As we prepared to leave, the businesswoman approached me directly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know this doesn't undo what we put you and your family through. I know money can't give you back those weeks of hell. But please understand that we thought we were protecting our daughter from someone who had hurt her." I looked at this woman who had orchestrated my public humiliation, who had used her connections to turn an entire community against me, and felt something unexpected: pity. She had been as much a victim of her daughter's manipulation as I had been, just in a different way. "Ma'am," I said quietly, "the difference is that when your daughter lied to you, you had the power to destroy innocent people. That's a responsibility you chose to abuse, regardless of your motivations." She nodded, understanding the weight of my words. Power without accountability had nearly destroyed an innocent family, and now that same family was walking away with enough money to start over anywhere they chose. As we left the law firm, my attorney handed me a check that represented more money than my family had ever dreamed of having. But the victory felt hollow somehow. The family would recover from this scandal eventually. The judge might not sit on the bench again, but they had resources and connections that would help them rebuild their lives elsewhere. Their daughter would serve some time, pay some fines, and probably emerge from the experience with a cautionary tale about consequences. But she would never truly understand the terror and helplessness she had inflicted on my family. Justice, I was learning, was often incomplete. Her public apology was scheduled for the courthouse steps at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, with every major news outlet in the region in attendance. She stood beside her parents, reading from a prepared statement with all the conviction of someone fulfilling a legal obligation rather than expressing genuine remorse. "I apologize to the young man and his family for the false accusations I made," she read in a monotone voice, her eyes fixed on the paper rather than the cameras. "I stole my mother's watch and falsely reported it as theft. I used my family's influence to support these lies, causing tremendous harm to innocent people." The words were legally sufficient, but emotionally hollow. Even through the television screen watching from my attorney's office, I could see that she understood this as a transaction rather than accountability. She was paying a price to make a problem go away, nothing more. The court proceedings that followed were equally unsatisfying. She pleaded guilty to theft, filing false reports, and conspiracy charges. Her sentence was 18 months probation, 500 hours of community service, and mandatory psychological counseling. She would serve no jail time, pay a fine that was pocket change for her family, and be free to rebuild her life once the probation period ended. "The system worked," my attorney said as we watched the news coverage, though her tone suggested she was trying to convince herself as much as me. She was caught, prosecuted, and punished. That's more than most people in her position would face. But the real justice came from what the settlement money allowed me to do next. Armed with $850,000 and a legal team that believed in accountability, I began systematically pursuing every person who had participated in the destruction of my reputation. The blogger who had written the "Betrayal of Trust" piece found herself served with defamation papers. The social media users who had spread lies about my family received cease and desist letters backed by serious legal threats. Most satisfying was the lawsuit against Channel 3's weekend anchor, who had editorialized about my obvious guilt during what was supposed to be objective news coverage. His station settled for $75,000 and issued a public correction acknowledging their rush to judgment in a complex legal matter. The local business owners who had refused me service based on the family's influence found themselves facing discrimination lawsuits. The family-owned grocery store settled for $20,000 and a written apology. The coffee shop paid $15,000 and implemented staff training about not discriminating against customers based on unproven allegations. Each settlement felt like a small victory, a recognition that actions have consequences, even for people who thought they were safely following the crowd. The money was nice, but the acknowledgement of wrongdoing was more valuable. The best friend's protection was written into every agreement. The family was legally prohibited from retaliating against her in any way, and several of the secondary settlements included specific language about not harassing or intimidating witnesses who come forward with evidence of wrongdoing. She testified at the sentencing hearing, describing the months of planning and the joy her former friend had taken in my suffering. Her courage in speaking truth to power had saved an innocent family, and the judge made sure to acknowledge that in his remarks. This young woman's willingness to risk her own social standing and safety to expose this conspiracy represents the highest ideals of civic responsibility, Judge Harrison said during sentencing. Without her intervention, an innocent young man might have spent years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. The State Bar Association also took action against the judge, formally censuring him for his role in the case and requiring him to complete ethics training before he could return to the bench. He chose to retire instead, ending a career that had been distinguished until his daughter's lies destroyed everything he'd worked to build. The businesswoman's empire never recovered. 2 of her boutiques closed permanently, and the 3rd was sold to new owners who immediately rebranded to distance themselves from the scandal. The family's social standing in the community was permanently damaged, their country club memberships revoked, their charitable board positions rescinded. But perhaps the most important outcome was the systematic change that followed. The police department implemented new protocols for investigating cases involving prominent families, requiring additional oversight and evidence verification. The district attorney's office created an innocence review board to examine cases where influential people might have affected prosecutorial decisions. The story became a case study in criminal justice classes, an example of how wealth and influence could corrupt investigations and why safeguards were necessary to protect the innocent. My name became associated not with theft, but with the importance of due process and the danger of assuming guilt based on social status. 6 months after the settlement, I received a letter from the best friend. She was starting college in another state, having transferred away from her former friend's school and our city's toxic social environment. Her final paragraph captured something I'd been struggling to articulate. I know you probably think the justice wasn't complete. She didn't go to jail. Her family still has money. They'll probably rebuild their lives somewhere else. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is that for once, powerful people faced consequences for their actions. Maybe the point is that the next time someone tries to abuse their influence, people will remember what happened to this family and think twice. She was right, of course. Perfect justice was probably impossible, but we had achieved something valuable. Proof that wealth and influence weren't always enough to escape accountability. The system had been forced to work, however imperfectly, and that was a victory worth celebrating. As I prepared to start my own new life in a different city, with enough money to attend any college I wanted, and the knowledge that I had survived the worst kind of betrayal, I realized that her courage had given me something even more valuable than financial security. Faith that truth could still matter in a world where power usually won. 1 year later, I stood in the lobby of Columbia University's journalism school, waiting to meet with the dean about a scholarship program I was funding for students investigating corruption and abuse of power. The irony wasn't lost on me. The money that was supposed to destroy my future was now creating opportunities for others to expose the kind of injustice I'd experienced. The financial settlement, combined with the secondary lawsuits, had totaled just over $1.2 million after legal fees. More money than my family had ever imagined, enough to pay for my education anywhere I wanted to go, enough to buy my parents a house in a neighborhood where the judge's influence couldn't reach them. But wealth wasn't the real victory. The real victory was independence, the freedom to speak truth without fear, the security that came from knowing powerful people couldn't simply erase me from existence anymore. My parents had taken early retirement and moved to a small town in Colorado where my father could pursue his dream of opening a woodworking shop and my mother could volunteer at the local library. They called every Sunday, their voices bright with the happiness of people who no longer lived in fear. The stress lines that had appeared during those horrible weeks had gradually faded, replaced by the calm confidence of knowing they had survived the worst kind of attack and emerged stronger. The judge's family had indeed survived, as people with resources and connections usually do. The judge never returned to the bench, but he'd found work as a legal consultant for a firm in another state. The businesswoman had quietly divorced him 6 months after the settlement, keeping half their remaining assets and disappearing into anonymity in some distant city. They had been casualties of their daughter's manipulation as much as perpetrators of my suffering. She herself had completed her probation and community service with the same mechanical compliance she'd shown during her public apology. Her psychological evaluation, which became part of the public record, diagnosed her with narcissistic personality disorder, and recommended extensive therapy. Whether she actually engaged with treatment or simply went through the motions was unclear. What was clear was that her life had been permanently altered. Her college had expelled her following the conviction. Her social media presence had been obliterated by years of harassment from people who'd followed the case. Job applications were routinely rejected once potential employers Googled her name and found thousands of articles about her crimes. She'd become what internet culture calls chronically online famous, known primarily for being terrible, her name synonymous with false accusations and spoiled privilege. Every few months, someone would post a "Where are they now?" update about her, keeping the story alive in the public consciousness. The community response had been perhaps the most unexpected part of the aftermath. What started as a local scandal had become a rallying cry for criminal justice reform. My story was cited in legislative hearings about prosecutorial accountability, referenced in academic papers about wealth inequality and justice, featured in documentaries about how social media could be weaponized by the powerful. The local high school had even added my case to their civics curriculum as an example of how ordinary citizens could hold powerful people accountable when they had courage and evidence. Students would study the best friend's decision to come forward, analyzing the personal risk she'd taken and the greater good she'd served. The best friend herself had thrived in her new environment. She'd majored in journalism and was already working for an investigative news program that specialized in exposing corruption. We exchanged emails occasionally. She'd become something of an expert on whistleblower protection and frequently spoke at conferences about the importance of speaking truth to power. "You taught me that friendship means more than loyalty," she'd written in her last email. "Real friendship means protecting people from harm, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult. The scholarship program I was establishing would bear her name, not mine. It felt like the right way to honor the courage that had saved my life." As I walked across Columbia's campus that afternoon, I reflected on how completely my understanding of justice had changed. I'd learned that the system wasn't designed to protect people like me, but that didn't mean it couldn't be forced to work when enough pressure was applied from enough directions. The judge's family had taught me that power without accountability was dangerous, but they'd also shown me that even the most influential people had vulnerabilities. Their reputation, their social standing, their sense of invincibility, all of it could be shattered when their actions were exposed to public scrutiny. I'd also learned that victory was often incomplete and complicated. She had faced consequences, but not proportional ones. The judge had lost his career but kept his freedom. The businesswoman had suffered social destruction but retained her wealth. Perfect justice was probably impossible, but meaningful accountability was achievable if you were willing to fight for it. The phone in my pocket buzzed with a text from my father. "Saw your interview on CNN. Your mother cried happy tears. We're proud of who you've become." Who I'd become. Not the victim I'd been forced to be for those horrible weeks, but someone who'd learned to fight back effectively. Someone who understood that power meant nothing if you were afraid to use it, and that real strength came from lifting others up rather than tearing them down. In trying to destroy me, they'd created their own worst nightmare, a person with the means and motivation to hold powerful people accountable for their actions. And I planned to spend the rest of my life doing exactly that.